No, I don't know what they are. No.
That's how top secret
which
they
is
are. I'm working on them and I don't even know what they are.
which is not entirely untrue.
That's awesome. Hello and welcome to The Grind, everybody. It's your host, Mark.
I'm Warren.
Warren, you sound a little distant. What's up, man?
Mark, you may have noticed that I have not lived in Seattle for the last 8 months.
What?
Yeah.
What, Warren? What do you mean?
Well, I moved to Santa Fe.
I know, Warren. I know.
And the reason that is because your advice, it worked too effectively. And I was able to negotiate a really great, fun job down here in my hometown of Santa Fe, New Mexico. And now I work for a company called Meow Wolf that mostly does exhibition style, gigantic art museums that are fully immersive.
Woo! Yay! Congratulations, Warren. Listen, man, I do want to just say this because I don't think I've really said it in the right way, but thank you for everything you did for the grind and for me. I remember I was thinking back today to when we met in that cafe in Capitol Hill, and I did not have a clue if the idea for the grind was any good at all, or if I could even do it, or really what it took to make a podcast. And you were just like, this is awesome, dude. I love it. Let's do it. And if you hadn't been like that enthusiastic, I never would have done it. And you were like my co-conspirator through this whole thing, man. So I just want to thank you for your partnership and for making it happen, dude.
I'm really glad you've done it. I'm really proud of the work we've done on this. And I really think it's going to help a lot of people. It helped me.
That's awesome,
Look at me
man.
now.
Well, and I know. You're like a pro.
I am.
And anyways, man. Well, so look, good news, bad news. I mean, bad news, we're going to miss you. You know, you helped make the grind what it is. But
Yeah.
good news is you also helped coach Taylor and Alex, our interns, who are going to step up to full producers for the rest of the season and help us close out our last few episodes.
Yes. I love those guys.
Yes, and you'll remember one of the first things we did was record some audio memos with Tuyen. And so right now, without further ado, we're going to meet her.
All right.
All right, bye,
All
Warren.
right.
Signed out. You want to do, can you do, okay, wait, for old time's sake, man. Can you do a sign off?
Oh my God. Let me see if I can make a super New Mexican sign off. Grind those green chilies, bros.
Nice, man. All right, thanks, Warren. We appreciate you. See you, man. Grind on. All right, so it's with a heavy heart that we bid farewell to Warren. Thank you for all your contributions to the grind. We know you'll keep the grind spirit alive in Santa Fe. But the show must go on, so here we are with producer Alex. Alex, we're meeting a new character today.
That's right. We're meeting someone named Tuyen, and I think rather than have me try to tell you all about her, let's have her introduce herself.
My name is Tuyen. I just turned 22 years old, and I go to the University of Washington in Seattle. I am studying human-centered design and engineering, and I'll be graduating in June. But yeah, I was born in Vietnam, and I moved here when I was 2. My parents and my family were sponsored by my uncle, 2 of my uncles who migrated away from Vietnam to escape the war. So they kind of put their foot on the ground and established a little bit of themselves here before they were able to sponsor their sister, who is my mom. So in 1997, my family was immigrated. We sponsored here to the U.S., and I've lived in Seattle ever since.
Okay, so Alex, what kind of stories are we going to cover with Tuyen?
I think there's 2 kinds of stories we're really going to see with Tuyen. First, being in human-centered design and engineering, she's going into a field that is so popular, that is so dynamic right now. It's one that is blowing up in Seattle. It's one that really is coming of age for people who are in college and graduating from college. But there's also something much more universal than that. You know, she is going on the job search process, a process that is stressful and difficult and confusing, and that applies no matter what field you're in, no matter what major you graduate with. So we're going to see a little bit of both, I think.
Great. Well, let's hear more about her backstory.
When I first moved here, it was really rough. My parents had $16, and at the time, I had 3 sisters. One of the uncles who sponsored us here had a motel that he owned, And so he kind of like employed my parents to work at the motel to kind of run it and manage it. So my dad was the manager. He was also the housekeeper. He kind of he ran the whole show at the motel. My whole entire family lived in a really cramped motel room for 6 or 7 years. We depended on government aid for a lot of our lives, a lot of my like growing up.
Okay, so her family was sponsored from Vietnam by her uncle. They managed a motel, also lived there. Not a lot of money growing up.
Yep, and she went to high school in Seattle Public Schools.
So at Washington, it's very segregated. And like no matter what people say, oh, Seattle Public Schools are so diverse and blah, blah, it's really not, because you go there and there's this thing called Spectrum, and there's this thing called APP at the time. The regular was where all the black people and Asians were, particularly Southeast Asian. So I'm Southeast Asian, so I was like right there. And then Spectrum are people who are a little bit more middle. A lot of white people, but also some like Asians as well. It was a mix of white and Asian. And then APP was just all white. So it was very segregated. For APP, it was mostly like your parents needed to know, like was very involved in your education, and my parents aren't and never were, because they're not familiar with the American school system and they don't know English. So how are they gonna like sign me up and kind of get their foot in the door in the education system? So I was always advocating for myself throughout school. Like even now in college, I'm advocating for myself. When I see my mom's like hands become crooked and look like they're kind of turning into arthritis from all the hard labor she does as a seamstress, or if I see my dad like falling asleep in the middle of the day because he has to work night shift, that's what drives me, because I'm like, I don't want them to keep doing that for 10 more years.
Do you sometimes wish that they could give you more advice?
Yeah, all the time, especially like when I was like beginning of college. It was really hard, and like up until now my parents don't know what I'm studying, and it's really sad. They don't know what human-centered design and engineering is, and I can't really communicate the idea with them because I'm not as fluent in Cantonese as I used to be. So there's a language barrier on top of a cultural barrier.
So what this all leads to, I think, is that Tuyen is very career focused. She thinks a lot about what job she's going to get. She likes the idea of work. She's already had an internship.
Last summer, I worked at a insurance company as like, okay, they put me into the IT department, which makes sense because I'm like a technology person. And they told me that I was going to do some user experience design stuff, which is what I want to do after graduation. But I ended up just sitting at my office doing nothing. Like maybe occasionally I would do some usability A/B testing. But then it just wasn't interesting. Like, I don't know, it just wasn't aligned with my skills or my interests. So I wanted to work somewhere smaller where people would know my name and where I could like have a intimate relationship with the colleagues and also like be good friends with them outside of work. And I knew that I wanted to work for somebody that was more understanding and more like an advocate.
And now she's back at it again, looking for full-time jobs this year. Did you apply to a bunch of different firms? Have you applied to a few? Did you do a bunch of research first? Like, where are you in that process?
Yeah, in the beginning of the school year, it was really slow. I didn't actually start applying until like maybe December.
So, Mark, where did you leave things with Tuyen?
Okay, well, I actually asked all the characters on the show. So I asked Yusuf, Amina, Ignacio to record voice memos of themselves as they went through the job search. So I said, open your iPhone, press record. And as you come out of interviews, like, I want to hear how you feel, as you get your acceptance letters, as you get your rejection letters, like, I want to be there with you. And none of them did it. None. Except Tuyen. So we actually have some really amazing audio of her walking into interviews, walking out of interviews, reflecting on the job process. And then afterwards, we're going to bring on a panel of folks to react to these memos. So you don't need to worry about any of the details of the specific companies. I really just want you to listen for the emotion. Make sense?
Makes sense to me.
All right, let's play the clip.
So I am on my way to these study rooms so that I can prepare for the Zillow interview that I have coming up. This will be my third phone interview with Zillow, and I'm really nervous but excited at the same time because Zillow is one of my dream companies to work for. I just feel a little underprepared because this week has been really, really busy and overwhelming, and I feel like my mind is kind of scattered all over the place, and I really just want to sit down and prepare for it a little better because right now I don't feel too confident. I feel just really nervous. I just finished my third interview with Zillow with the hiring manager, and the interview went really well. I was given another opportunity to walk through a project on my portfolio. But yeah, the interviewer said that I should hear back soon. He didn't provide a timeline and was unable to when I asked him to. I'm very kind of nervous. So it is March 1st, and I have an interview today with Pitchbook. This will be my second interview, and it's going to be over Skype. Right now, I'm just preparing for the interview by doing a little bit of last-minute research about the company and coming up with some questions to ask the interviewer. Yeah, otherwise, I'm feeling pretty confident with this interview. I'm not too nervous, and I think it's because I've had a lot of phone screen interviews, and in general, I'm still waiting to hear back from other companies. I've had several phone interviews with managers, and I'm still waiting to hear back. I haven't been invited to a final loop interview yet with any of the companies I'm actively interviewing with, so that's a little bit frustrating and uneasy because I just want to know, like, do they like me or do they not? And so I just hate waiting, and my goal at the beginning of the quarter was to try to obtain a full-time offer before the quarter ends, and the quarter is ending in like a week and a half, and I still don't have an offer or a invitation for a full-time loop. So I feel very uneasy and more nervous every day when I don't get an email response from recruiters telling me about next steps. So I just got out of a meeting with another company. This time around it was with IXL Learning, and it was interviewing for a UX design position in San Mateo, California. I feel like I did pretty okay. I don't know. I actually don't think I did really well. It was just bad. But I don't really mind because it was still good interview practice. I realize now that I still need to practice walking through my portfolio. But yeah, I don't know. I won't be really disappointed if I don't get this offer because I don't really want to move to San Mateo. And especially if they're not going to offer a competitive salary. I looked on Glassdoor and noticed that the UX designers, at least entry-level UX designers, earn less than like the state average for California. The salary is not high and the living is high, so I don't really want to move somewhere where I have to spend all of my money in living expenses. It was good practice, and if anything, if I do get moved on to the next round, it would just be more practice. It is March 8th, and it's a little past 4:30 right now. I just got home from a very long day of school, and I had a long team meeting earlier today that took up a lot of time. But anyways, I wanted to do a quick voice record because during the team meeting, I pulled up my phone because I felt vibrations on my phone, and I checked my email and noticed that I had received 2 back-to-back job declines from the first one being Pitchbook and the second one being IXL Learning. I know originally I said that I wouldn't be devastated getting these job declines because these companies weren't really like at the top of my radar, but it is very devastating, and it just hurts because I received the rejections back to back, like literally seconds apart. I was really hoping that I would get a job offer before the quarter ended, and the quarter is ending at the end of the week. This year it's especially hard, and I don't know if it's because I'm applying for full-time positions and I'm doing it basically all alone, or I just don't have enough confidence, and I'm comparing myself too much to my peers, I don't know, it just feels like I kind of let myself down. It's another reminder that I didn't make it. And it's another reminder that I'm not good enough. And I know I shouldn't be thinking about it that way because there's a bajillion reasons why I wasn't chosen. I shouldn't really think that way, but it's hard not to. I've been on the job hunt for like since November, end of December now, and I still haven't gotten any luck. I just feel like a little part of me is dying inside. I'm losing more and more hope every time I get a job decline. And I don't know, I hope this is a normal feeling, and I hope other people I'm not the only one.
Well, that was our interviews with Tuyen and her voice memos. So Alex and I are joined in the studio now by two guests. So we have Karin Rogers, who's a mental health professional and counselor at the UW Mental Health Center. And we have Ani, who's a recent graduate of the UW. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So we're going to have you guys introduce yourselves more formally in a moment. But first, I just want to get your reactions to that audio. So anything that comes to mind basically listening to Tuyen tell her story.
The main thing that I thought as I was listening to her tell her story is how brave it was for her to talk so honestly and openly about her feelings, because the job search is really hard and there's a lot of pressure to put on a good face and persevere and to actually admit that it's hard and that you're struggling. It takes a lot of courage, and I was struck by that.
Yeah, I agree 100%, especially because she talked about how her parents weren't really involved with the job hunting process. And just after I had been through the job hunting process, I had depended on my parents so much. Like, I'd call them when I got rejected. I'd call them when I got an interview. So I can't imagine going through that by myself. So a lot of kudos to her.
So, Karin, why don't we start with you first? So you work with students all the time at the UW, right?
That's right.
And as they go through this process, I would assume.
Yes.
So is Tuyen's experience fairly typical, you would say?
Yeah, it depends on what you mean by typical, because everyone is unique. So a lot of the themes that she was talking about are themes that people talk about and experience when they're looking for jobs. And in that sense, yes. I mean, the heartbreak of working so hard and not finding your place right away is something that we talk with students about all the time in the mental health clinic. A main thing is that transitions are hard and they're scary. And so not knowing what your next step is and where your place is going to be after you're coming out of having had 4 years in college, which is just barely enough time to acclimate, if it's enough time at all, is a really unsettling time. So there's internal pressure to figure it all out and find out where you're going to go. And then, of course, there's pressure from parents. There's maybe inadvertent pressure from peers, professors, society to, be successful and find a job. And I think that pressure starts earlier and earlier now.
Yeah. And Ani, you just went through this.
Yeah.
I mean, so what was your experience?
It was actually very similar to hers. I think I got my job in May, my job offer, but I had started around November as well. So that was a good 6 months or so period where it was just like, okay, what's going to happen? Just pure anxiety of what my future would be, because I had no idea what it would be after June when I graduated. Yeah.
And I heard you say anxiety. And so, I mean, what does it feel like when it kind of goes from the good stress that sort of motivates you and helps with your personal growth into this sort of negative stress? Maybe talk about kind of for each of you how you see that and how the role stress plays in this process.
Well, for me, it became negative stress when I think it was after the rejection letters, the first one started coming in, because then it was really, I was doubting myself and doubting my self-worth, because with each rejection letter, it's like, oh, maybe my skills aren't as valuable as I thought. Maybe my experiences won't really lead to a job. So then it became more of a self-image thing as opposed to like, oh, I'm excited about the next opportunity. I just have to work hard to get there. So it became a very different tone as soon as, I guess, the real world started setting in.
Can you say more about the self-image thing? Like, what do you mean by that?
Well, I was a comm major, so a liberal arts major in college. And for me, it was both of my parents came from very technical backgrounds or like skill-based backgrounds. My dad's a computer programmer, my mom's a nurse. And so with liberal arts, when I became that major, my parents were not very supportive in the first place.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. And so I did a pretty good job most of my college career kind of like combating that, trying to do as much as I can. But once job hunting started, it's like, oh, maybe that stereotype of poor liberal arts major is true. Maybe I won't find that job.
I guess I'm interested in this social comparison thing and this kind of feeling of yourself reflected through other people's eyes. I mean, that's always an issue, I think, and especially, I mean, with parents, I have a very similar experience to you as being a liberal arts major, and I get the questions of what are you going to do with your life.
Yeah.
And I'm a podcast host now, so my parents are very proud. But you know, to maybe talk a little bit about what it's like to kind of go through this process alongside other people, but maybe not with them, you know, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think I was kind of an interesting comm major, at least with my peers, in that I was actually taking a lot of business classes on the side. So I actually had more friends in the business school than the communication school. And so with business, it's a very different recruiting cycle, especially depending on your field, like accounting or whatever. But I had friends that were getting job offers in like October, working for like Microsoft or some major firms. And so it definitely felt like kind of like I was comparing myself to them, even though we were in completely different cycles, really, of the recruiting stage. And yeah, it was hard. It was hard.
Like, what does that look like? I mean, how do you even know people get job offers?
Mostly, well, at least with my close friends, you know, they'd be so excited about it. They'd post on social media. Facebook is usually the number one. And then at the same time, I'd just be talking with people in classes, and they'd be like, well, I'm covered. Like, I'm kind of checked out by now. I have a job offer in June. Like, I don't really need to work too hard on this final project. And so you like just little things like that you start noticing more and more throughout the job process.
And what does that make you feel like when your friend or your peer or someone in your class says like, oh, I'm covered, you know, for next year?
Oh, it makes you feel really bad. Really bad. You're just like, the anxiety peaks up ×2, honestly. Yeah.
Does it reinforce like, oh, I haven't got myself taken care of yet? Or is it, you know, is it jealousy or competition or what?
It really wasn't like a jealousy thing, especially since a lot of my friends were like, I was really happy for them. But it was definitely just like, oh shit, like, what am I doing wrong? Yeah.
I feel like that's the hardest thing about this because Alex and I were talking about this, like, you want to feel really good for your friends, right? Mm-hmm. And like the experience somehow almost robs you of that because the second you want to feel really positive about like their successes, but you end up just feeling kind of more inward looking and more negative about yourself, right? And so I can relate to that, I'm sure. I heard that a bit in Twins comments as well, of just sort of seeing on Facebook or friends posts, and it's no one ever really posts about something we've talked about. No one ever really posts about, oh, I didn't get that offer, right? Or oh, another rejection today. It's always, hey, I'm heading to Palo Alto, like, heck yeah. Karin, maybe we can bring you back in here. I mean, so how much of, you know, the stress that we maybe see students experience or young people experience during this process would you attribute to this sort of social comparison aspect or the fact that other people are kind of going through this with you?
I think it's definitely a universal experience. I mean, social media in particular just amplifies all of that, you know, being able to scan through your feed and see everyone else's exciting jobs and, you know, successes. And, you know, there's the thing about you're comparing your own blooper reel with everyone else's highlight reel.
Yeah.
So
that's
there's
good. I've never heard anyone say it like that. That's makes total
really
sense.
good.
Yeah, so you know that you've been to these interviews and they haven't worked out, or, you know, how you messed up in what you said the other day, and you don't know about some of the, you know, people, like you said, aren't posting those things on Facebook. On the other hand, when someone posts on Facebook that they've just gotten a job and they're excited, that's true, I mean, probably most of the time. So so there is something, I think there's also a lot of pressure for people to say, everything's okay and to not let themselves feel the real feelings that they have along the way. It is disappointing to not get a job. And as excited as you are for your friends when they get jobs, it hurts when you're not having that happen as easily or as quickly as some others.
And just like, I know that it's put you on the spot here to answer all of our problems. This show's turning into like a Frasier now. Do you even know what Frasier is?
I actually love that show.
It took place in Seattle.
Yeah.
It was a call-in psychology show. If you have that negative response that you don't want to have to like your friend's success, for example, and I'll just put myself out there and say I felt that before. What's the right response? I mean, should you kind of like wish it away or pretend you didn't see it? Should you turn off your social media? Should you own it? Like how should we react to those feelings that go through our head that maybe we don't like?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And I'd be interested actually to know what you guys do and what's worked and what hasn't. I mean, I don't know that there's a right answer for that. I think that everyone's different. And I think that, one of the things that's really helpful is becoming less afraid of our own feelings, that it's okay to feel disappointed. It's okay to grieve when something that you really wanted doesn't work out. And, sometimes by shutting off social media or, just trying not to think something, we're running away from feelings that are normal and okay to have. And instead, what we could be doing is focusing on getting support, learning to take care of ourselves, learning to be less afraid of all of those big emotions that are just a normal part of putting yourself out there and applying for jobs and, going after dreams. So there's that. And also, to pay attention to when it's all just getting to be a little bit too much. It's very stressful applying for jobs, and if getting the constant barrage of information about other people's searches is overwhelming and getting in your way, maybe it is a good idea to leave Facebook for a while or, to take a break. So I think really just paying attention to yourself and what's working for you and what's not, getting support when you need it. And that can look like a lot of different things: support from friends, support from a therapist, taking a break and going for a walk instead of looking through your Facebook feed, things like that.
So I think you bring up a really good point, which is knowing when it gets too much. I mean, but that's kind of hard, right? I mean, it's again like this feeling of what stress is good stress, what's like nerves versus stress, what's excitement versus stress, anxiety. I mean, so what are some symptoms, I guess, that we might be feeling but not knowing we're feeling that are cues to us to start taking care of ourselves better, going for that walk, talking to people?
Yeah, I think noticing if you are able to sleep, if you're eating regularly, if you're connecting with the people and things in your life that are important to you, or if those things are starting to fall by the wayside. Those are really big signs to pay attention to, changes in your own behavior. Because you're right. I mean, stress, anxiety, those things can be motivating, and they can, kick us into action when we need to get into action, and they serve some purpose. But when they start interfering with our lives, keeping us from doing the things that are important to do for our health, that are important to do for our well-being, that's when it's time to pay attention and maybe switch strategies.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about social media. So we did on a previous episode of The Grind, we covered social media and just how the norms are changing in a lot of ways. That when I was going through the job search process, again, not many years ago, some years ago, the advice was shut your social media down completely. Like, so people deleted their Facebook accounts. There really weren't any other accounts then. but it was basically hide yourself, right? Because at best, that social media presence will be neutral, but most likely it'll be negative, right? And I see, some of the young producers we have on the show, like Alex and Taylor, actually kind of like ramp up their presence, especially if they're in communications and they're photographers, or they're posting their thoughts. And on, Twitter is a journalism tool, right? So I don't know. I'm curious, like how the norm. Maybe Alex, you can jump in here too. But how the norms are sort of, changing, and are and just kind of like what it's like to go through the job process and the job search process with social media being such a huge part of all of our lives now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think my social media habits necessarily changed that much during the job search. I definitely use LinkedIn probably 5,000% more than I used to, like senior year. But I guess in terms of social media and trying to like approach strategies on how to management, this is kind of like an immature strategy. But if I saw like people who kind of annoyed me on social media getting that job, I would probably unfollow them.
You're nodding, Alex.
No, I'm a huge fan of the unfollow. Unfollowing is like I feel like people don't unfollow enough on Facebook because you can stay friends with someone and they won't know you unfollowed them. It's not mean or rude. It's just I'm not going to say who, but I've unfollowed a lot of people who I'm friends with, and I still love them and I want to talk to them. I just don't necessarily need to be seeing all the amazing things they're doing in their life. Like that's not, I just considered like, is that enriching me to be seeing those? And sometimes it is. Sometimes like, oh, that'd be a cool thing to do. But more often than not, it's like, what's the reason for me to see this?
Yeah.
If I can't find one, I'm not going to follow them.
Will you like then refollow them at some later date if you feel like it's time to reintegrate that voice into the world or to your world?
Generally. It depends how much I like them, but
sometimes it's a permanent decision, sometimes temporary.
Exactly.
Cool. All right. Well, what else?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, as you mentioned, as a journalist, using Twitter is kind of a necessity. We actually at the school newspaper, part of being hired is you have to make a Twitter account and you have to have a professional one. And so, you can and should have, share your opinions on things and have it reflect your personality. But it's professional. So you're not putting everything out there. You're not tweeting your every thought. And so that's like part of being a communications major for me, at least, is like you have to communicate. I think traversing those boundaries, like I run into the exact same problems. I'm always seeing people who are being really successful, and it kind of makes me question if I'm doing enough. And yeah, I think it's really a matter of like you kind of fight the battle little by little. You unfollow people that are getting to be too much. But there's such powerful tools, and I think now we've moved beyond employers just using them to see. It's no longer the case that employers are just like, oh, let me make sure they're not doing anything too crazy. Now, especially for the jobs I'm applying to, they are looking at my Twitter. They do want to see what I'm talking about and what I'm passionate about and the people I'm interacting with, what kind of presence I have, how many followers I have. And it might sound kind of shallow, but it's just the reality. If that's your job, you have to have that kind of presence.
Totally agree. So there's a interesting riff on this, which is then the image that you all create, right? Or that we all create. Because like you said, I mean, part of you getting hired, Alex, could be about having a strong social media presence, right? And that means saying the right things, in some ways having the right opinions could be, that doesn't leave a lot of room for the kind of vulnerability that we were all just talking about. We wish there was more of in some ways, right? So I don't think any of us have an obligation to post about, our struggles, but I don't know. How do you guys think about that? Like if you're going through a tough time or we're not succeeding in the job search, I mean, what value can kind of basically publicly struggling with adversity have, do you think?
There is something, we all have these messy, vulnerable insides that we feel varying degrees of comfort about exposing. And even when, it's not out there all the time, I think for most of us, when we get a glimpse of someone else's messy insides, it makes us feel closer to them. It makes us feel like we want to help. We have empathy, and it also makes us feel better about our own messy insides. And so I think that I don't think anyone has an obligation to be vulnerable online. That might not be safe for a number of reasons for people.
That's not right.
But to the extent that people feel comfortable sharing some of that stuff, social media could be a really powerful platform, for bringing people together and for helping people feel less alone.
And totally. And I mean, you see a few cases sort of publicly of people doing this. I just think of, for whatever reason, Sheryl Sandberg, who lost her husband recently and was very public about that. And just, I think a lot of people in my wife's generation, and women and men as well, are sharing more and more about miscarriages they have, which previously is a stigmatized subject matter. And again, no obligation, but people were really responding to that. I think it's doing a lot of good to kind of shine a light on things that previously would have been like taboo. And there is this thing called like non-social media with real life, I guess, where you can just call people, right? Or you can go talk to folks. I guess any other thoughts on that about like sort of public adversity? And
I definitely think mostly good can come from showing vulnerabilities. And I think especially for me and for younger people, for people our age, it comes down to doing it in a healthy way. So yes, like I am totally in favor of like, let's start a hashtag and just get people to like admit their job failures. I think that'd be awesome.
Yeah,
that's a really good idea.
That's great.
I kind of want to do it, but it's good to frame things. I think you give things a story, you kind of create a narrative for things, and you put things not necessarily in like a cheesy way, but you put an element of hope to it. And you say, look, this didn't work. This is what I'm still trying to do, like, or this is how I've changed my approach. Or maybe I haven't figured it out yet, but I'm hopeful that I will. The danger is you don't want to run into a situation where you're just moping and there's no kind of lesson or there's no forward momentum from it. But as long as you have even a little bit of that forward momentum and you're saying, this is what I'm doing, and I just wanted to share this because this is something I ran into that I think a lot of other people did, then yeah, I mean, not only are you opening up, and I think you're showing a lot of strength by doing that, but then every single person who sees your status, who certainly has gone through something similar like that gives them strength too. Then they're like, oh, I feel validated now. I've been through that. Maybe I can take that same message away for myself too.
Yeah, what you said brought something up for me too, which is thinking about why we're posting what we are online. Because once we post it, we have very little control about how it's going to be received and what kind of feedback we're going to get. So if we're using that as a tool to get the support we need, it may or may not happen. But, if we're wanting to share something that we've been through that we think might be useful to someone else to help someone else feel less alone, or if it feels, I think it's just worth thinking about how to do that in a way that is safe and not leaving you too vulnerable to other people who may not respond in the way that you were hoping.
Definitely. And I think, again, like going back to the whole unfollowing or even unfriending, if it can be a good way to kind of see who maybe you shouldn't be, if anyone, I think if you have anyone who responds negatively to that kind of vulnerability, that's a good sign to axe that person from your friends list. It might be a good way to filter out some people's Facebook's friends.
Yeah.
Let me fly my flag and see who sticks around. So I'm going to pivot us a little bit to caring for yourself during this process, right? Because no matter how much we do, we make ourselves vulnerable and how much we share, and we can hope the internet changes into a tool for good and not evil. It's going to be a hard process, right? It's one of the hardest things people go through when they're trying to find a job or when they're out of work looking for a job. So how do you all, and I'll open it up, mostly I'm kind of looking at Karin here though. I mean, how do we take care of ourselves during this process? Like, how do we keep ourselves sort of mentally, physically, healthy as we go through the struggle?
Yeah, good question. And actually, I'm happy to start, but we
should all go around.
We should all go around. Everyone has different experiences with what's worked for them, taking care of themselves. I do think some of the very fundamental things like getting enough sleep, eating good food, getting a little bit of exercise every day or some kind of physical activity, staying connected with friends and people that are supportive. Those kinds of things are really important and make a big difference. And they're also often the first things to go when we're stressed out. So we can actually even feel guilty. I have felt guilty about prioritizing stuff like that at times when I really should be working on another cover letter or whatever. But it's like, there's another analogy about, when you're in an airplane and they say that if the oxygen masks come down, you have to put on your own oxygen mask before you put on your kid's oxygen mask. Same thing. I mean, if we're not doing the basic things we need to take care of ourselves, we're not going to be able to help anybody else or do the things that we're wanting to do. So I think some of those things are important. And then, of course, as a counselor. I think, paying attention to when it's gotten to be too much and your own coping skills are exhausted. And it's helpful to get some help. And sometimes talking with someone who's outside of your life, who you're not otherwise involved in a relationship with, so there's no pressure or expectations. They're seeing you with fresh eyes and they're there to do nothing but listen and help can be really helpful. So seeking counseling or mental health support can be really helpful to get through those big stressful transition times too.
Yeah, definitely when I was in the job search, I wish I had gone to a counselor. I didn't. But looking back on it, I think I really should have, and I would have benefited from it. For me, I think the number one thing that I did was I just allowed myself to take a break from job hunting every once in a while.
What did that look like, taking a break?
Well, for me, I was someone in college who was always on the run. Like for the first 3 years, I was just always doing an internship or a job or something. So like I actually rarely went on Netflix. I rarely took just a day off. I was always working on some kind of project. And so for me, I would, if I had a really bad interview, I would take maybe a week off, and just kind of decompress. And I would spend at least one night that week watching a Netflix movie that I had always wanted to watch but never made the time for. I would do silly stuff like do my nails, which is something I don't regularly do. Just things that, self-care that I should have been doing all through college, but I'd kind of just been putting off for 4 years. I was like, okay, now's the time. Yeah.
I was going to say, that's awesome. So how did you think to make that switch and do that for yourself?
Oh God, actually, that's a really good question. I think it might have had to do with my roommates. I had new roommates my last year of college, and they were really good at kind of drawing me out of my work mode and being like, hey, let's go out, take a break. Why don't you watch this movie? You were talking about it earlier. So they were really good at just being supportive friends to me and kind of reminding me that, the job hunt isn't everything that you can do. You can start with yourself too. So.
Yeah, I want to jump in and just emphasize also just how incredibly important good friends are. I mean, just having people around you who understand you, who, like you said, will push you out of your comfort zone when you need to be pushed out, but who are also able to stand back when you need time alone and who understand that. That's the most valuable resource by far that I've had. And I mean, we heard it when Tuyen was talking, the experience is so universal, but it's so isolating. So when you're at least able to surround yourself with people who maybe aren't going through the exact same thing as you, but they get it. I think just having people in your life who get it, who are able to listen to you and sympathize and say, that sucks, I know how that feels. It's seemingly such a small thing, but it means so much.
Well, I think it's a really hard thing. I mean, you kind of got at it a bit, Alex, but my next question was going to be, how do we support our friends and family who are going through this? I mean, because not everyone wants to be helped in the same way. It can feel that way, right? And sometimes it feels like you're butting your nose into somebody else's business, and maybe they just want to be alone and you don't want to say the wrong thing or give advice that's not relevant. So, I mean, I don't know. How do we support each other? I mean, what does that look like? I mean, when does it work? When does it not?
I think one of the most meaningful times to me when a friend reached out during the job hunting process was I had a friend who got rejected around the same time as I did for one of our jobs that we were interviewing for. And she was like, do you want to just spend the night and drink and watch movies together? And that was really great because she was the first person who I knew was in the exact same boat as me. That really was meaningful. So just being there, I guess, together, especially if you can relate is a good idea.
And something nice in there, too, I think, is the fact that she reached out to you. And I think, that we can feel worried about wanting to give people their space and leave people alone and not butt in. And so we wait for people to ask us for help sometimes. And I think that's a hard thing to do. And I hear a lot, and I have felt a lot in my own life, that you don't want to burden other people.
Yes.
So, as a friend, I think one really nice thing that you can do is proactively check in with someone that you know is in the middle of a job search or just had a bad interview, or, and say, hey, I'm here. Do you want to hang out? You let them decide whether they want that or not, but you let them know that you're thinking about them and that you're there.
That's a great point. And the worst thing that can happen is they just say, no, I'd rather be alone. And it's no big deal. No one's going to hold it against you, right? But it doesn't feel like that, does it? It doesn't. It feels like somehow it's more, I don't know. I'm like going back to my head and wishing I offered more help.
Yeah.
to folks.
Yeah. It's hard. I mean, I don't know. There's something hard about doing that. I mean, maybe that also is a vulnerable thing to offer help and maybe have them say no, maybe, but.
I just wanted to kind of come back to what you guys were talking about in terms of that feeling of guilt almost around taking care of yourself, right? Like, and I think we can associate taking care of ourselves with, oh, well, this is like for my health. But I think there's a knock-on effect of you just being better in your interviews then eventually, because you're positive, you're feeling happier or confident or more centered. That comes through, right? I mean, it's hard to perform when that stress meter goes over that line of, positive to negative stress. And so one way we can maybe encourage ourselves to take better care of ourselves is to understand that, like, look, long term, this is actually better for me on the job hunt too. This is not just a separate thing. This is going to affect my entire life, right?
Absolutely. There's been research about that. So there's this sort of developing awareness of self-compassion and the importance of self-compassion. And when you say that for the first time to people, a lot of them have this immediate negative reaction. Like it feels kind of gross or weird or indulgent to think about being compassionate with yourself. But there is a growing body of research about how central self-compassion is to resilience and success and happiness and all sorts of things. So, when we think about the way we take care of other people in our life, we routinely talk to ourselves in ways that we would never talk to our friends, even on our worst days. And I think we do that because instinctively, when we're trying to support other people, we recognize that being compassionate and understanding and supportive is going to help them. And somehow, when it comes to ourselves, we have learned that we need to be really hard on ourselves.
That's really interesting. Yeah, you treat yourself like you're like the meanest sports coach ever, and you're like, you gotta try harder. You're not good enough, as if that would ever motivate you, right? Well, guys, any kind of parting shots here? I mean, we've listened to Tuyen. I think we've all admitted that we've had sort of similar experiences of feeling isolated, hopeless at some level during the job search process. To folks who are listening to this show and maybe are going through something similar, I mean, is there anything we want to leave our audience with here? Any parting thoughts?
I guess I can say something.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah. I mean, this is almost a cliche at this point, but just embracing failure. I guess to share a little bit about how my job search is going. I just today got off the phone with the publisher of a small newspaper that hopefully I'm going to be driving down in a few weeks to go meet and hopefully be getting a job there. And up until this point for the last few months, I've been seeing my peers get jobs and internships. I've been feeling kind of like, am I a failure? Am I not? Do I just not have the chops to kind of be doing this work? And now I'm starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm feeling like I'm on the other side. I had no idea how good it would feel to be finished until I got there. But if I hadn't gone through those failures, if I'd like put off college instead and tried to figure it out beforehand, I don't think it would have helped. I think I had to go through those to get to the point I'm at now. So I think obviously like letting yourself feel the pain when you fail, but just remembering too, like this is part of a process. Like this is just one of the steps. This is the part in the story when the hero has their first battle and loses, but the story's not over. So I think that's, for me, that's been really helpful, and that's what's gotten me to where I am now, to where I'm feeling pretty good. I'm like feeling good about the future.
Well, I want to hear from everyone in a second, but first of all, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing, Alex. And you brought up this other connection from a previous episode, which is storytelling and the power of narrative, right? Is that the facts remain the same, but like we ultimately control the story we tell about ourselves to ourselves, right?
Right.
And so framing it as a redemption story, or this is the part of the story where we're down but we're not out, rather than this is the end, right? I mean, that's super powerful, like the power of personal narrative. Right?
And it doesn't feel that way when you're in the middle of fail.
So you're writing it in hindsight, but still.
Every single time I fail, it always feels like this is the big one. I'm done. It's over. And it feels for 45 minutes, I'm like, this is it. I'm done.
Yeah.
I should have known better. And then, about an hour later, I'm like, oh, it's fine. I'll be fine.
Well, and we also forget, I mean, in the moment, we also forget that we have overcome these things before, right?
Right.
I mean, and so you have to sometimes remind yourself that, like, look, I've been here, I've done this,
this
it
before.
sucks, but it'll be okay.
Right, exactly.
Thanks for sharing that.
And with that being said, like, I felt like I learned a lot from my failure in terms of how I treat myself. Like, I talked about self-care earlier, and I don't think if I had gotten a job right away, like, I would have never learned to take care of myself. I probably still would be in this constant, like, I have to grind mindset. And then I don't know how that would have affected my work life now, but, I go home now and I make sure to do something fun. And I didn't used to do that before. So that's definitely something I learned from the job process. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got two thoughts, I think. So one thing that what you guys are talking about the stories that we tell ourselves, I think that is huge. Our brains reward us for telling stories. That's how we've evolved. And somehow we, even though, we know that we can't, we believe our stories so much in the moment when we tell them to ourselves. And it can get to the point that when we're making predictions about the future, when we're telling ourselves stories about the future, we believe it. So when we're in the moment of feeling like we've been rejected, feeling disappointed, it's easy to tell the story, I'm a failure. My life isn't going to work out the way I wanted. And those are just stories. And, to hold on to the stories we tell ourselves a little lightly and realize that that's just our brain making up thoughts, making up stories. And those stories might shift over time. And, there's no way to get them to shift immediately. I can't just tell myself, hey, feel better about this. This is a silver lining. It's too soon in the moment. But somewhere down the road, that story might shift. So to just recognize when you're telling yourself stories. The other thought I had, just as a parting thought is, that we've talked about that this stuff is hard. Looking for a job is hard. Not getting jobs is hard. And sometimes we can conflate having difficult feelings with something being wrong or something being wrong with us. And that in this case, having these difficult feelings is a normal part of the process. And it just means that you're going through this, this period of growth, and it's hard and it's going to hurt sometimes. And there's help out there if you need it.
Well, with that, I want to thank you guys for coming on. So thank you, Ani. Thank you, Karin. Alex, thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
All right. That was our panel. Thank you again to Ani and Karin.
And as always, thank you to Trackman Productions and PG Boo for our music.
That's it for our show today. I'm Mark.
I'm Alex.
And we want to leave you guys with one last clip from Tuyen. It's really a solid transition from this week's episode into next week. We'll play it over the outro music. Grind on, everybody.
Grind on.
So it is March 29th. I just had a phone call with a connection, Matt from Madrona Venture Group, and I'm later going to meet with Jay and Mike at the Madrona Lab. I also wanted to provide an update to let you all know that after spring break, I'm finally back at a place where my mind is healthy enough to apply to jobs, because at one point I just felt like giving up.